Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Americas. Here's a look at what's coming up in today's show. Images of a dead father and daughter from El Salvador drowned trying to get to America fuel the already tense migrant crisis on the U.S. border. Then you'll meet some of the billionaires who signed an open letter to Democratic presidential candidates asking the U.S. to tax them more. And 50 years after the Stonewall riots of 1969, we'll look at how the police raid on a gay bar in New York helped kick off the LGBT movement around the world. I'm Jeannie Gallula. This week, a devastating picture of a migrant father and daughter drowned face down in the water of the Rio Grande shocked the American public. The image crystallized the very real risks thousands of Central American families are taking to try and make a better life. The picture came on the heels of a scandalous report out of a U.S. detention center in Texas. And this week, the Democratic House passed a $4.5 billion border bill to help migrant children in U.S. custody. But as Solange Mougin explains now, it still has to get past the Republican Senate and the president himself.
Step one for a $4.5 billion aid package. The U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill that would provide funds to feed and care for migrants, $3 billion of which would be allocated to help unaccompanied migrant children detained by border security. But the proposed legislation now faces an uphill battle to get through the Senate. And even if it does, Donald Trump is likely to veto the bill, which also sets standards for care. The measure passed largely on partisan lines, 230 to 195, and only after progressive Democrats were reassured by their leadership that the funds would not be used to enforce border security. It is, for many, of the utmost urgency.
There are children who are without food. They are without medicine. They are without water. They are without soap. They are without diapers. They are without toothpaste. Shame on us.
The push for funding comes after reports that some 300 children were being held without their families and in despicable conditions in a windowless facility in Clint, Texas. Many were kept there for weeks without adequate food, shelter, and water. Outrage over their treatment has pushed legislators to act, and it's also prompted the head of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection to resign. It's expected he'll be replaced by a hardliner, the head of Immigration Enforcement, or ICE. Donald Trump said existing legislation and not his policies are to blame for the inhumane treatment.
The asylum rules and laws are so bad that our Border Patrol people, who are so incredible, aren't allowed to do their jobs.
With a surge of migrants at the border and in overcrowded, underfunded facilities, at least 6 children have died since September.
Our number of the week is a massive one, $3 trillion. That's for the $3 trillion that could be earned in U.S. tax money over the next 10 years if some American billionaires have their way. Close to 20 of them signed an open letter to the candidates of next year's U.S. presidential election. They say they want the creation of a special wealth tax to help the United States.
Investment fund manager George Soros, Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes, and 17 other mega-wealthy Americans are united. They want to pay more tax. They've signed an open letter urging presidential candidates to back higher taxes on the richest 0.1%.
A wealth tax could help address the climate crisis, improve the economy, improve health outcomes, fairly create opportunity, and strengthen our democratic freedoms. Instituting a wealth tax is in the interest of our republic.
The billionaires praised support for the idea among Democratic presidential candidates like Pete Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, and in particular Elizabeth Warren, who's proposed a specific policy. Senator Warren wants to raise taxes on those with more than $50 million in assets, a measure expected to affect the 75,000 wealthiest families in the U.S. The letter says, however, that it's non-partisan and doesn't endorse any particular candidate. It cites polls showing most voters would welcome such a tax, regardless of their political alignment. Last year, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said wealth inequality among its 36 member countries was highest in the United States.
Thank you, sir.
50 years ago this week, protests at a gay bar in New York helped launch the modern LGBT movement we know today. Olivia Salazar-Winspear takes a look back at the history of Stonewall.
Police officers stormed the stage at the New York City Opera. Luckily, this scuffle is fake. It's a rehearsal for a new show to mark 50 years since the Stonewall riots. The Stonewall Inn was the name of the gay bar in Greenwich Village, the scene of a brutal police raid in 1969, and an event that remains a painful memory for those who were there.
Behind me is the bar, which on the night of June 27/28, 1969, as an 18-year-old, I was inside of. Police came in, I should say barged in, started throwing people or tossing people up against the wall.
At the time, this bar, like many others, was regularly targeted by police, but this was to be the straw that broke the camel's back. 6 nights of clashes between law enforcement and the LGBT community followed, riots that would go down in history. From the summer of '69, gay rights marches and protests were a regular sight on the streets of New York. In 1970, the first Gay Pride Parade was organised and the fight for equal rights was launched.
This is the site of the beginning of our new history, where we decided to take up a torch and to begin again and to demand our civil rights. We didn't know that the world would join us and be proud, but so many people did that it has changed the way that people grow up in this country.
Since the 1970s, there has been significant progress when it comes to LGBT rights, notably when same-sex marriage was legalized by the Supreme Court in 2015. However, some have pointed to an increasingly intolerant climate in the country, exacerbated by the Trump presidency, citing a rise in homophobic attacks. In 2016, 50 people were killed at a gay club in Orlando, Florida, when a gunman opened fire. A sober reminder that LGBT venues were still a target 5 decades later.
Stonewall will be our first national monument to tell the story of the struggle for LGBT rights.
2 weeks after that attack, Barack Obama made the Stonewall Inn a national monument, recognition that put it on a par with the Statue of Liberty.
We are stronger together.
For many people, summer means vacation, and for many Americans, a favorite holiday spot is Mexico. But this year, Mexico's thriving tourist industry is taking a hit. Its usually beautiful coast has been invaded by algae, and it stinks.
This summer, the Mexican coast won't look anything like a postcard. The turquoise sea has washed ashore dozens of tons of sargassum, a foul-smelling algae. It's an ecological disaster that's also harming a key sector of the economy, tourism.
It's a surprise. We're a bit disappointed because we came here for the crystal clear sea. What we're getting is this algae. We would rather not see this.
As a result, the beaches are mostly deserted. Tourism industry professionals say their losses could reach several $1 billion. When sargassums decompose on the shore, they kill all forms of life underneath. Scientists fear irreversible consequences.
In recent years, their quantity has become problematic. We are heading towards a very serious ecological disaster if decisions are not taken urgently.
The cause of the invasion is the rise in sea temperature, which favors sargassum proliferation. Every morning in Puerto Morelos, residents take part in the effort to clean their beaches. Some have even decided to do more. Everything inside is recycled. Victoria started a business using sargassums. She makes these notebooks. They're 100% organic.
I think the solution lies in these small projects, these notebooks or these pods.
Victoria uses 200 kilos of sargassums a week to make her notebooks. Faced with an ecological emergency, Mexicans have no other choice than to get to work and collectively try to turn the nightmare into an opportunity.
We'll leave you now with this breathtaking story from New York, where this week the Flying Wallendas were back in action. A brother-sister duo from the famed acrobatic family crossed Times Square on a high wire strung between two skyscrapers 25 stories above the pavement. Nick Wallenda is a seventh-generation acrobat who's been tightrope walking for years, but this time he said he was very nervous. That's because his sister, Liana Wallenda, was with him for the very first time since a near-fatal accident 2 years ago where she broke nearly every bone in her face. This time the siblings made the crossing safe and sound. That's all the time we have for this week's show. Thank you so much for watching Inside the Americas. We'll see you again next week for all the news from north to south. And don't forget, if you want the very latest on the region, you can always check out our website. The address is france24.com. Stay with us.
Two heavily armed students enter Columbine High School. They shoot down a teacher and 12 students, injure over 20 people, then turn their guns on themselves. One of the world's first mass shootings covered by live news channels across the country. Back then, this shooting caused deep trauma and launched a debate on gun control. How to deal with the problem, train teachers to shoot, or tighter gun control legislation. 20 years later, our reporters met some of the survivors and activists fighting to bring about change.
20 years on, we revisit Columbine High School here on France 24.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith on France 24 and France24.com.